Hello, everyone. This is Rick, and I wanted to share a few thoughts about an article that I wrote recently called "Why Aren't We Talking About the Theology That Drives White Christian Nationalism?" It was published by Baptist News Global on March 2nd, 2023. So before I get into my article in particular, I wanted to clarify something that has been a bit confusing regarding this article. Some people have wondered uh, what I mean by talking about how certain academics don't talk about certain topics that are outside of their area of expertise. And so I didn't mean that. I didn't intend that to be a knock on academics. It's simply been kind of the situation. I mean, when I went to BioLogos conference a few years ago, the different scientists, they would talk about their field of expertise, but then whenever something came up about another area, they would always say, well, that's not where my area of expertise is. I would defer to so and so on this. And it's something that I've noticed that theologians tend to focus on theology and historians tend to see through the lens of history, and sociologists tend to see and talk through the lens of sociology. And so in one, I'll bring up a couple quotes here I wanted to share. Kristen Dumais wrote an article called "Let's Talk Endorsements" that she published, I think it was a couple days ago on Saturday. And she said, regarding about, when people asking if she'll endorse a certain book, she says, if it's more a work of cultural history, that would probably work. If it's theology, that depends. I'm not a theologian or biblical scholar, so my expertise is pretty thin in those areas. And then later she says, in academic spaces and in the general media, I'm frequently asked to weigh in on issues or topics within my area of expertise, but rarely on areas outside of my expertise. On the rare occasion when a journalist or academic reviewer asks me to comment on an area outside of my expertise, I simply explain that I am not an expert and that I haven't done research in that area. Whenever possible, I direct them to scholars who have done that expertise. And so there was now coming to my article, there was a conversation that was going on with the PRRI about this polling data that they came up with regarding Christian nationalism. And the panel that was there was filled with historians, sociologists, and writers. And there were no theologians there. There were no non-Christians there. And one of my concerns was that they were there, the conversation as it was going, especially with Peter Weiner and Jamar Tisby, seemed to be setting Christianity or Christian nationalism off as the separate thing from this whatever pure form of Christianity that they believed in, and they were treating it very much as a historical and a socio-cultural situation, and so one of the things I wanted to bring out in this article was let's utilize historians, let's utilize sociologists, let's utilize journalists and people of different disciplines. If we're talking about science and faith, let's utilize scientists, but let's also bring in different theologians to the table. If we ultimately, I think a lot of this stuff, a lot of the Christian nationalism power dynamics, they tell us how they're getting it from their theology. So let's examine their theology. And to do that more effectively, I think we need theologians who know the nuances of the language more, who know how certain theologies developed more, and also non-Christians who are not in the Christian boxes of certain assumptions, who are outside of it, who can offer a perspective that is worth hearing. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, let's utilize everyone who's still involved, but let's add more voices to the table. Also, I just wanted to point out one thing I talked about towards the end was this idea of this assumption about pure Christianity, that there's this pure Christianity and that people who are Christian nationalists, oh, that's not really Christianity. But there's somehow this pure Christianity that we can get to that is unaffected by culture and all of this stuff. And I'm not saying that, well, what I'm saying is that really there is no such thing as a pure Christianity. that's untouched by culture. Even if you go back to Jesus himself, Jesus was an apocalyptic prophet, and apocalyptic prophets were a first century group of people that had particular questions they were wrestling with. It was a political cultural conversation, and that even the most committed dispensationalists or Christian Zionists who think they're having those conversations that Jesus was having, they're not having the conversations and asking the questions that Jesus and other apocalyptic prophets were having. That doesn't necessarily mean that Jesus is now proven to not be the Son of God. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. What it does mean is that if Jesus is God, he was incarnating into our conversations, into our concerns and questions that we were having during his time. And so I think we need to recognize that, and we need to recognize the fact that we are asking different questions today. We're asking some similar overlap, but there are some different questions today, and we need to be able to recognize how what an evolving and culturated Christianity might look like today. And so I say in the article, I say there is no pure Christianity. Instead, Christianity is an evolving and culturated living out of whatever its communities interpret to be good news in the tradition of Jesus. And so I think the question that I come away from this article with is, what do Christians interpret to be good news? And what we settle for or celebrate as good news says a lot about us and directly affects how we live our lives and how we pursue justice in the world, specifically when it comes to conversations about Christian nationalism.